Blake, are these Mavs creating a new identity for themselves?
I think they are starting to trend in another avenue of winning. And I noticed this watching the games as I was. Also, Mark Followell put out a great tweet.
He does that. 6
wins in the last 7 games for the Mavs. In those 7 games, they're shooting 33.2% on threes and only making 11.5 in a game.
Is that good?
That's not good.
Okay.
That's not good. And I was listening to Locked On Mavs earlier, and Nick Angstadt was talking about how before the trade had happened, when the Mavs had shot under 30% in a game for 3, they were 0-7. They lost every single one. So 7 games they shot under 30%, they lost all of them. Now, since that mark, they've done that 4 or 5 different, I believe 5 different times, or 4 different times, and they're 3-1 in those games while shooting under 30% from 3. And Mark Followell continues that clearly it needs to improve the 3-point shooting, but it's encouraging to win games when outside shots aren't following. Paint points, they're at 55.5 per game, and defensive rating at 109.3. So, Reggie, I just thought it'd be interesting to get the Tolo's thoughts on this, get your thoughts on this. It kind of feels like the Dallas Mavericks are creating another avenue to win basketball games, where it felt like they were so reliant on the 3 ball, Luka and Kyrie driving and kicking, and the role players had to hit a bunch of threes. They were top 2 in the league at putting 3-point attempts up, making them whatnot. The last couple of weeks, they haven't been putting as many up. They haven't been making as many as we mentioned in the earlier segments, but they're still finding a way to win basketball games. How true do you think they've kind of found a different avenue of winning?
I think that's true. The tough part about it is then if we are willing to accept the idea that the Mavericks are finding a different identity than the one they previously had, I think the question then becomes, what is that new identity? And that, I think that's where it gets a little tough because, sometimes Jason can be saying things that rub people the wrong way or that people don't entirely agree with. And so I guess I'll start by asking, do you agree with this sentiment? Because Jason Kidd has said that the identity of this team is Luka Doncic.
Yeah. I kind of have you watch the games, it's obviously Luka. Luka has the ball in his hands 24/7. The players are trying to get the ball into Luka's hands. But what I've noticed a lot more is that it's not just Luka just scoring the ball. I know he leads the league in scoring and puts up a bunch of shots every night, but he has so much on-ball gravity that releases guys like Lively and Jones and Gafford to rim run and get those dunks. I mean, Gafford and Lively are both top 10 in dunks right now. And that's not usual for a Mavs center to have.
That's more because they haven't had centers that could do that.
Agreed.
Really.
They have guys that are, when you watch the Mavs play, it's not like they're just getting wide open dunks every time. Now, don't get me wrong, they do get a good amount of those, but these guys are creating space. These guys are getting offensive rebounds and going back up and dunking it. Lively and Gafford can go up over the opponent where they are in the not best position to get the rebound, still get the rebound, go back up and put it up over someone, which you're not used to seeing for the Mavs. We're getting these extra offensive possessions now. These things where, Tim put out a bad shot, or Luka or Kyrie or PJ, and it's like, there goes a possession. When you have Lively and Gafford out there, you're just getting extra possessions where that 3-point shooting is minimized for how bad it is being. And some great on-off splits and were put out and offensive rating. What do you think about this lineup of Kyrie, Luka, Derrick Jones Jr., PJ, and Gafford, which has kind of been the new starting lineup they've been going with the last couple games? They've played 69 minutes together. It's the 3rd highest minute total of any Mavs lineup this season. Their offensive rating with those 5 is 124. Their defensive rating is a 98.6, which is the lowest of any of the Mavs lineups that have played at least 20 minutes together, which is a net rating of 25.5. I feel like they've kind of found a formula for getting enough offense out there, but having defensive pieces out there. That's 3 defensive pieces you have out there with Jones, PJ, and Gafford. 3 defensively inclined guys. They can also score, but their main thing I would say is defense out there. And I feel like they're finding a thing where they can get some paint presence. They can get inside now. They can touch the paint and not be all right, Luka just drive and kick to a guy, a role player sitting in the corner and hasn't shot all game.
But that's the interesting thing, because going back to what I was talking about with the idea of, Luka Doncic is the identity of this team. I still think it's that, right?
It's still that right now.
And because, I think just the ways in which that manifests itself has shifted a little bit, but they're still trying to get those jump shooters. It just feels like now where you're still spread pick and roll. You're still Luka Doncic, creating. It just seems to be a little bit more creating and then dropping something off into the paint, or creating more and lofting a lob as opposed to
running
the kick
actions
out,
for other stuff.
the kick out to the outside. And so in some ways, it still feels like team functions the same, but I don't want to be so obtuse that I don't ignore, or that I ignore rather, the ways in which it does seem like this team has been more focused on getting the ball into the interior. And I think that's great because those are the more efficient shots in the paint, close to the rim, right? Those, as much as
Gafford leads the league in field goal percentage,
right? As much as I think people kind of overcorrected on the 3-point shot, and I think it's more like the way that we think about it, especially if you think a little bit more simplistically, the idea that 3 is more than 2, so everybody takes the shot, right? Because it's more efficient than most 2s. Well, there are 2s right at the rim that are actually the most efficient shot when it comes to points per shot. And so if you get down there with the size that you have, particularly now, that's a good way of being maximum efficient. And I think that they're finding ways to do that a little bit better. And so I do think that they're finding more, at least offensively, with their identity in that way. But defensively, I think is the one that's been most interesting to me. And that's the place where I'm trying to figure out what is the identity. And it seems like the identity is simply, which is not super difficult or super far from where they had previously been, especially when we talk about that playoff run, which is just making sure that you don't let people in the middle of your defense.
And I'm glad you kind of brought up that defensive identity. And I think 2 guys have been helping with that. And it was in that first mention of the new lineup. Dereck Jones and PJ Washington have been really good on defense. I don't know if you guys noticed during that Denver game, they were giving Jokic fits. They gave Victor Wembanyama last game fits. Victor had his worst shooting game of his short rookie year, 3 of 13, could barely score, was obviously still going to get his. But I thought Maxi did a great job. I thought PJ did a good job. I thought Jones did a good job. And when you can throw all these different guys on you, you're not as tired where you just have, all right, we can only have one guy that really guards them. And I thought it was really interesting kind of seeing their on-off split. So the Mavs offensive rating when Dereck Jones and PJ are on is a 125. Their defensive rating is a 100. That means a net rating of about 24. Off the court, their rating drops to a 122. This is the biggest part. Their defensive rating goes from a 100 with them on and a 117 with them off. So they are 17 points worse per 100 possessions with Dereck Jones Jr. and PJ off. Now, it's not the end-all be-all. You're out there and now all of a sudden you can't stop a cold. But I think it's very evident the size and the length that you have when you have PJ and Jones out there. It just gives you more versatility. You're able to hide Luka and Kyrie more often rather than when you have Hardy and Tim and some of those other guys out there. So that was just something interesting to monitor, and I think it kind of bleeds into the Maxi closing. I think when you have PJ out there, we saw like he was guarding Jokic at some point. He was guarding Victor at some point. So now I'm understanding
he wasn't guarding Jokic that much.
Maxi did a much.
Maxi, you meant. Sorry, I thought you were talking about PJ. My apologies.
Like Maxi was doing a good job of guarding those guys. How much do you think you can supplement PJ into guarding those guys? And because I know a lot of fans are like, oh, why is Maxi closing games? And I'm like, this is defense. This is defense. Do you think that his defense is so great that it can keep him on the court with this offensive slump he's in towards the end of the game? More so?
I don't know. And I don't say that as just like avoid the question. I'm sincerely in that place where I'm not certain
if there's a solution. Because
the idea is he has a reputation of shooting, but he has not really knocked down shots in that way this year. But
he's hit 6 or 7 since like the trade in. Like it's not been good. Like 3 balls.
I mean, but you can really go through the entirety of the year. He has not knocked down shots that well. And of course, to be fair, he did miss a good amount of time with that toe.
Yeah.
That was really.
He was good on that 7-0 stretch when we thought we were going to win the championship. Other than that, it's been pretty.
And his defense is, I think. And I don't want to be the guy who is like negging Maxi Kleber because especially during this time where they're playing well, right? There's going to be times where they play poorly and then the negativity feels a lot more warranted and a lot less out of left field. But I think Maxi Kleber's defense has sometimes grown to an outsized place because for such a long time you did not have good defensive players. He's not a bad defender by any means. I don't think that he's an elite defender. And so it gets tough because you have players that are better defenders now that also provide things on offense.
Where do you think Maxi gives you your biggest help on defense? Like against post players, against fives that can spread the floor? Because I feel like I see him get beat a lot on the dribble.
Yeah, he doesn't have that. He doesn't have a lot of lateral quickness, particularly now. He's gotten older as a player, and of course, like that's a testament to him that he's been able to be in this league and be useful. But yeah, he's not a dude that's like super mobile. I think more than anything, he just got a little bit of a lot, right?
Yeah.
He can do a little bit of everything in that regard at a decent stretch. So like he can be a little bit more versatile.
Not a liability.
And I think that ends up being the interesting thing. But
trustworthy.
And when you talk about the bigs that you have, he probably is the most mobile of the ones that you have.
I need Lively to get even more limber.
Right. And so I think as Lively develops, you will, and this is probably what you want. Maxi Kleber won't be as necessary to what you're doing. But again, I'm not saying that to like get Maxi out of here. I think the point just remains like as you get better, Maxi will be less important in what you have to do. But for the course of this season, I think he offers one thing that is really important, which is a dude that the coaching staff, the decision makers trust.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is. The basketball IQ, I think, is probably where you talk about it. As much as we're on the floor, the basketball IQ, knowing that he's going to make the right decision at the very least defensively, I think is the big thing.
He's the one inbounding the ball for that Luka 3 in that Nuggets game. He's the one that inbounded the ball to Kyrie on the game winner, made the swing pass to Exum the other night. So he's making a lot of the right plays. I'll ask you this. Do you think this trend of 3-1 while shooting under 30% from the 3 is something that can continue into the playoffs?
I don't think you want to continue it, right? Like you want to be able to knock down shots.
Of course.
Like I just don't know how successful you're going to be not knocking down shots in this league, particularly in this league now that where the 3-point ball matters, right? You don't see very many teams that don't account for it. In fact, one of the best teams in the league, and the Boston Celtics does it a lot. What's funny though is one of the teams that's the best team in the league in the Denver Nuggets does not do it at an incredibly high level, but they do it sufficiently enough. And I think that sufficiently enough is going to be necessary. If you're just talking about like playoff caliber teams, I don't think that they can do that at a high enough level to do that consistently, especially because I haven't seen that defense be consistent enough to make up for it yet. They did that in a great way and they against I guess San Antonio, and then also against the Nuggets in that game on Sunday.
Out rebounding them by 21, like that is.
But that's the thing. That's what was necessary. You needed that.
Yeah.
You needed, and of course, that some of that is the benefit of the defense, right? But you needed all those things to be able to, make up for not being able to knock down shots outside of Luka and Kyrie. And so it's a tall task to ask for.
Just something to monitor, Tolos, that the Mavs are starting to hit a little less shots, but they're still winning basketball games, and that they may have a new avenue of winning creeping up. Just when you're watching the game to see how they won the game or how they lost the game, and let me know what you think.
Yeah, and that is the good thing, is that you're seeing these things get better at the right time of year. That's one thing that I cannot be any level of negative towards. They're figuring things out. They're putting things in line at the right time of year. Just got to keep stacking those. And of course, they have an opportunity to do that tomorrow as they welcome in the Utah Jazz. And, Laurie Markkanen, John Collins, Colin Sexton, all of them, you have an opportunity to really show them something. And that's another team that they have some size, even though Walker Kessler hasn't been getting as much game. I think John Collins has been playing a lot of small ball 5.
Did John Collins get it back from that head injury?
Yeah, I don't know if that head contusion has gotten together, but that's another instance where I want to see if these Mavericks continue to assert their dominance in the paint that it seems like they're starting to do. And that might really be their new identity, is leaning into the height and the size that they have acquired by making sure that they added PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford at the trade deadline.